income tax rates.
Question number 3, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by his statement that I am concerned about the risk that New Zealanders become tenants in their own land, end quote? If so, what specific actions will his government be taking?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes, and I noticed actually that the Leader of the Opposition used the same statement when he was getting monstered by Guy and Espinel on Q&A in the weekend, which from what I could see was a lot more Qs from Guy and Espinel and not many As from Phil Goff.
Now, I say to Minister, I've just have been clamping down on questioners who sought my assistance when some of their questions were perhaps not totally compliant with standing orders, but this question was a pretty fair question. Asked, does the Prime Minister stand by his statement, and if so, what specific actions will the government be taking? I'm sure if the Prime Minister waits, the questioner won't be able to resist putting a political statement into a supplementary, which maybe will give the Prime Minister some licence, but this primary question does not have the licence to dump on the questioner. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes, and as the Minister of Finance recently announced, we will be giving ministers extra flexibility to consider a wide range of issues, including large-scale ownership of farmland when assessing overseas investment applications for sensitive land. In particular, 2 new measures will be introduced in regulation. Firstly, a new economics interest test factor will allow ministers to consider whether New Zealand's economic interests are adequately safeguarded and promoted. This will improve ministerial flexibility to respond to both current and future economic concerns about foreign investment, such as large-scale ownership of farmland. Secondly, Mr Speaker, a new mitigating factor will enable ministers to consider whether an overseas investment provides opportunities for New Zealand's oversight involvement, for example by appointing New Zealand directors or establishing a head office in this country.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, wasn't the review that his government instituted last year into foreign investment in fact about making it easier for people from overseas to buy our farmland, not harder?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Mr Speaker, there were a range of objectives from the review, but what we have found is that changes to regulations that I just outlined are appropriate.
Supplementary question.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, when the Minister for Land Information admitted to the House last week that not one single application from a foreigner to buy land under his government had been declined, why did his minister then go on to say that he couldn't promise the new rules that the Prime Minister outlined would result in any higher rate of decline?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I wonder if the member just could repeat the question. I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
I'd ask the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to repeat the question,
Mr Speaker, when his Minister for Land Information admitted to the House last week that under a national government not one single application from foreigners to buy farmland had been declined, why did his minister then go on to say that he couldn't promise that the new rules would result in any higher rate of decline?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, well, the Minister advised me he didn't say the last bit of it, and I accept him at his word, but what I do know, Mr Speaker, is he's not a minister that signed off on 680,000 hectares of land being sold. He's not a minister that signed off on 380,000 being sold in 1 year. And, Mr Speaker, we'd rather look at a party's track record than its fake promises.
Mr Speaker.
Mr Tremain.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, what safeguards currently exist in legislation regarding sales of New Zealand land to foreigners?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, what an excellent question. The Overseas Investment Act lays out that foreign investment in land is only acceptable if substantially benefits New Zealand, and this is measured in section 17 of the Act. So, for example, under this section, ministers have to consider whether the overseas investment will result in, quote, the creation of new job opportunities in New Zealand, the introduction into New Zealand of new technology, increased export receipts for New Zealand exporters, the introduction into New Zealand of additional investments for development purposes, and increased processing in New Zealand of New Zealand's primary products. These are precisely the criteria that Mr Goff tried to announce in the weekend as brand new see. All he did was read out the act he passed in 2005.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker.
Order. I've called the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to ask
Mr. Speaker, when none of what the Prime Minister has just read out has actually stopped every application under his government from foreigners to purchase foreign land being approved, what will he do to guarantee that young couples wanting to buy a farm of their own are not priced out of the market by wealthy overseas investors seeking to buy up land here?
The Right Honourable
Mr.
Prime
Speaker,
Minister.
Deliver them a highly competitive economy and a tax cut so they can afford to pay their mortgage.
Mr. Tremain.
Supplementary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Prime Minister. When was the Overseas Investment Act...
I apologise. Now, look, I want to be able to hear. The Senior Government Whip does have a big voice, but I do want to be able to hear his question. A little more reasonableness in the interjection level. Chris Tremain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Prime Minister. When was the Overseas Investment Act last reviewed?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Another excellent question. The Overseas Investment Act lays out that foreign investment in land is only acceptable if it substantially benefits New Zealand, and this is measured in the Act. It was last reviewed in 2005 after a comprehensive review initiated by the Labor government. A key purpose of the new Act was to ensure that foreign investment in land would be permitted only if it made a positive contribution to the economy and advanced New Zealand's interests. Under those criteria, in the following year, David Parker, as Minister of Land Information, approved the sale of 380,000 hectares of land.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister is saying that nothing that the Labor Party is proposing actually alters the existing rules, why did he then describe it as Stalinist? Or is it a bit like communism for stealth, like he described working for families?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the reason I described it like that is because what I noticed in the weekend was that the Leader of the Opposition likes to get out there and cry.
Point of order.
Point of order, the Honourable Rodney Hyde.
Mr. Speaker, we had the Leader of the Opposition ask a question and a great deal of clapping because finally they were excited over there.
Order.
But then the problem was no one could hear what the answer was because of the barricade.
Order. I'm sure the Prime Minister is probably keen to repeat it, but sorry? Oh, the Prime Minister hadn't finished his answer. I mean, the question was a very provocative question, and there's nothing the Speaker can do to... it's a matter of basically letting the sides go when that happens, but if the Prime Minister hadn't finished his answer, I'll invite him to finish his answer and ask the level of interjection to be no more than enables people at the back of the House to hear the answer. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker.
Point of order. The Honourable David Parker.
Point of order. My point of order is that the Prime Minister had sat down before Rodney Hyde made his point of order.
Order. A point of order is being considered. I'll hear Keith Locke.
In your comment just before, you said that when a question is provocative, you let both sides go. Well, that's not very satisfactory to people back at this end of the House that can't hear what's going on just because Labor and National might be barracking at each other. I think we deserve to be able to hear what's going on.
I certainly sympathise with the member and I accept the rebuke. To me, what I probably shouldn't have done is allow the question because a question like that is strictly not in order. But the House has got to have a little bit of fun. The member wanted to ask the question, and I'm sure the Prime Minister was perfectly capable of answering it. And it was my impression he sat down because the noise level was so high I realised no one was hearing anything. Expect me to do something about it. Now, I've invited the Prime Minister to finish his answer without being perhaps any more provocative than he has to be. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, you can trust me, I won't be any more provocative than I need to be. I didn't actually call the policy Stalinist. I simply said, Mr. Speaker, it was that the Leader of the Opposition was having a road to Stalin experience. And the reason why I said that, Mr. Speaker, was when I looked at all the things that the Leader of the Opposition did in the weekend, I noted to myself, like on foreign land, like on cost of living, he simply cried.